All in one take.
Okay, so today we're going to continue our discussion of American music history with a composer named Charles Mingus. And Charles Mingus was an African-American composer who was active as a musician, primarily as a bassist and pianist from the 1940s to the 1970s. And so first I'll just give a brief overview of his life, and then we can look at one piece to demonstrate how his work was actually pretty influential political commentary at the time that he wrote it. So basically, Charles Mingus transformed American music because on the one hand, he learned from an earlier generation of jazz and blues composers such as Duke Ellington and Louis Armstrong. And on the other hand, so he combined these older forms with all different types of other music to combine in new ways. So he was born in 1922 in Arizona, and he grew up in Los Angeles. At home, his parents played both gospel music and European classical music. And at school, he learned cello, piano, and bass. So all of these musical influences kind of promoted him to decide to pursue the music business after he graduated from high school in 1940. And he kept taking bass lessons. He got to be a pretty amazing player, and so much so that he attracted the attention of both Duke Ellington and Louis Armstrong, and toured with Louis Armstrong's group in 1943. So having the experience of playing and working under these masters inspired him to try to become a band leader himself and get a group of his own together. So to do this, he moved to New York City and established his own recording company in 1953. This was important because this independent label would give musicians more control and fairer treatment in the recording process. It's also important because rather than conforming to the recording industry's expectations by starting his own recording and publishing companies, Mingus wouldn't have to cater to the listener or the recording industry's expectations. So some of these expectations were that because he was an African-American composer, that he would produce music that sounded like the jazz music that people were used to hearing, and that he wouldn't produce music that European or American musician would. So to kind of illustrate this contrast, I'm going to play an excerpt of an early Duke Ellington piece, and then I'm going to play an excerpt of Mingus's first piece, and we can kind of just see how Mingus's work challenges the listener's expectation in the type of instruments and the sounds that he chooses. So here we go with Duke Ellington. So that was kind of the music that people were used to hearing since the 1920s from African-American composers. And so here is Mingus's first piece that he wrote when he was 17, called Half-Mast Inhibition, and you can just kind of hear how it sounds quite different. So basically, And then in the rest of the piece, it goes on to combine certain jazz phrases and idioms with this more orchestral type of sound. Because this music, when he wrote it in 1939, this piece was not performed for a long time because of its kind of, in that era, unexpected form. And so it kind of undercut what the listener was expecting from an African American composer, because it combined orchestral and forms, and the music industry was expecting typically jazz or blues sounds. So now I want, maybe we can just spend like a few minutes writing about a piece that you know, a contemporary piece that you know, that you think challenge your expectations, or just the general listener's expectations in either its form, the way it sounds, or in the lyrics that it uses. And then after you write, think about that for a little while, then we can talk about it, and tomorrow you can bring in your examples of those songs.